the Israelites, the children of Israel, Allah Azza wa Jalla describes a lot of the different diseases that they suffered from, psychological, spiritual, intellectual diseases. And we're told about those diseases so we avoid them. One such disease that I want to highlight to you that we're supposed to be mindful of is that a person can be very religious in their rituals. So they're extremely practicing when it comes to their prayer, when it comes to their recitation, when it comes to their fasting, when it comes to their observance of halal food and haram food. They're extremely, extremely strict and they're very observing. But when it comes to financial matters, business dealings, when it comes to loans, when it comes to, partnerships, these are the kinds of things in which you find a completely different personality. The same guy, the same woman who's extremely observing in many rituals of worship, they're extremely religious from the appearance of things and from the ibadat side of things. But when you look at their mu'amalat, their dealings with people, especially financial dealings, it's a completely different story. It's the same guy who's reciting Quran with perfect tajweed, and then the guy who he owes money to is calling him and he's sending them to voicemail. Right? There's a kind of a schizophrenia going on here. There's a dual personality going on in which you observe the law and you want to please Allah through worship, and you want to please Allah through Ramadan, but you don't want to please Allah by fixing your money matters. And so what Allah does in Surah Al-Baqarah, as these 6 ayat, or 7 even ayat, from like 180 to 186, this passage that's dedicated to Ramadan. The immediate next instruction, right after Ramadan, after all the ayat of Ramadan are done, the immediate next instruction is the ayah I recited before you. Allah Azza wa Jalla says, وَلَا تَأْكُلُوا أَمْوَالَكُمْ بَيْنَكُمْ بِالْبَاطِلِ وَتُدْلُوا بِهَا إِلَى الْحُكَّامِ لِتَأْكُلُوا فَرِيقًا مِنْ أَمْوَالِ النَّاسِ بِالْإِثْمِ وَأَنْتُمْ تَعْلَمُونَ. A rough translation is difficult, but I'll try anyway. Allah says to the Muslim community, don't consume your monies among each other using falsehood or without purpose. There's 2 implications there, bil-batil. وَتُدْلُوا بِهَا إِلَى الْحُكَّامِ. And don't use these monies to draw in and to reel in using those monies the rulers, meaning judges and things like that. Don't corrupt them using your money. That's one implication. لِتَأْكُلُوا فَرِيقًا مِنْ أَمْوَالِ النَّاسِ بِالْإِثْمِ. So you end up consuming a huge chunk, a separated chunk from among the people's money, public funds, if you will, sinfully. وَأَنْتُمْ تَعْلَمُونَ. And you well know. This ayah actually has a progression of corruption. It starts with some basic level of corruption, and it progresses and progresses until it gets to a level of corruption that can even destroy an entire society. So I wanted to actually highlight this to you because in the sequence of the ayat of the Quran, first Allah talked about Ramadan. Then there's this strange ayah that talks about finances out of nowhere. And then the next ayah is actually about Hajj. يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْأَهِلَّةِ قُلْ هِيَ مَوَاقِيتُ لِلنَّاسِ وَالْحَجِّ. It's actually about the Hajj. So 2 of the major pillars of our religion, Ramadan and Hajj, are there, and in between them is this thing about take care of your money matters. Why is that important? First of all, understand this sequencing, some things about this sequencing. Ramadan is supposed to build in you a consciousness of Allah, a presence of Allah in your life. That's what Ramadan is supposed to do. And if you recognize that taqwa of Allah, you protect yourself from making Allah unhappy, then you won't just have taqwa of Allah when you're fasting or when you're praying or when you're inside the masjid. You will have taqwa of Allah when you do business. That taqwa will actually extend. Just like our fasting extends to everything you do throughout the day. It's actually a training that consciousness of Allah, just like that hunger and that thirst extends the entire day, that taqwa of Allah should extend the entire, all of your activities, especially financial ones. And then as you've cleaned up your money and you're no longer consuming or spending corrupt money, now is time for you to talk about going to Hajj, because you shouldn't be going to Hajj with corrupt money. And by the way, that's another psychological disease. There are people who have no shame earning shady money and then going to Hajj every year. They have no shame making money out of clearly haram sources, or swindling other people, or holding back from making their payments, or whatever else, and then they want to wipe the slate clean by going to Hajj. Allah Azza wa Jalla is commenting on this corruption and is saying Ramadan is supposed to transform you in every sense, not just the spiritual sense. It's supposed to transform you in the ethical sense, in the moral sense. Now a deeper dig inside of this ayah. لا تأكلوا أموالكم بينكم بالباطل. There's a duality that Ibn Ashur, Imam Razi, others also recognized about this ayah, because when it literally translates, don't consume your own monies. Don't eat your own monies. First of all, with money, you don't think about eating, you think about spending. لا تنفقوا أموالكم. right? But Allah says, لا تأكلوا أموالكم. Al-akal, there's a tashbih here. There's actually an imagery being drawn here, and it picks up from what we just heard. The ayat right before I just told you are about what? Ramadan, in which we don't eat. And so speaking of not eating, don't eat each other's monies either. Just like you're not eating as I tell you not to eat, it's time for you not to eat each other's monies. And by the way, eating is only done when you have an appetite. So the idea of greed being paralleled with hunger. Like human beings want more money for themselves, and actually the desire for money and greed is actually even more powerful than hunger, because people want more money even when their stomach is full. Even when they have a house, even when they have a car, even when everything is taken care of, you still want more. The hirs doesn't stop. The greed doesn't stop. So Allah compares it to an unsatiated, unfulfilled kind of hunger. And then He says, Amwalakum, your own monies. This is a very powerful statement, because it has again a duality in meaning. Allah could be talking about my own money, the money I have in my bank, or the money that I have in my savings, or my property. He could be talking to me about my own funds. And He's also talking about the money that we share as a community. Meaning, just like you are protective of your own wealth, you're supposed to be protective of the wealth of others as well. Because this ummah, this believing ummah, is actually ummatan wahida. It's one single ummah. Rasulullah ﷺ will describe it kajasad, like a single body. So when you think about cheating somebody else out of their money, it's like you're cheating yourself. It's like cheating yourself. And that's why iqtatalu is used, for example, when Muslims fight each other, the verbiage used in the Quran is they're fighting themselves. It's as stupid as fighting yourself. So cheating another believer is literally cheating yourself. That's the mentality we're supposed to develop. We're supposed to be as protective of the wealth of the other as we are of our own wealth. And that's the expression amwalakum. Bainakum bil batil. Now among you using falsehood, let's understand that. The word batil can mean two things. Batil is the opposite of the Arabic word haqq, could mean falsehood. So جاء الحق وزهق الباطل إن الباطل كان زهوقا. Quran uses the word batil in the sense of lies or falsehood. But the Quran also uses haqq and batil in the sense of purpose and lack of purpose. The implication is don't eat each other's money using lies, falsehood, corruption, cheating. Don't tell someone you will deliver the product and you have no intention of delivering the product. Don't agree to this price and then not pay that price. Don't become a contractor and say, yeah, I can finish this house or I can finish this room. This is the budget, no problem. It'll be done in 2 weeks. And then it'll be done in 6 months. And there were some things I didn't realize that the price is quadrupled. This is batil. This is corruption. But there's another dimension, and that's obvious, right? Don't be corrupt with each other in your dealings, and don't eat each other's money using falsehood. This kind of thing I've spoken to you, especially in this congregation, about before. But the other implication of batil is purposelessness. Don't eat up each other's monies on things that have no purpose. Don't squander and waste wealth. That's actually also a great source of corruption in society. The mutrafin in the Quran, the people of excessive wealth, are described as spending on things that have no purpose. And when a society makes money above the bare sustenance level, like they make more money than they need to survive and they have extra savings, then the mind starts spinning, what more can I spend on, right? And you start spending on frivolous things, useless things. At the top of that list is things like entertainment. You start spending more and more money on entertaining yourself. Like people going to expensive concerts, or going to exotic theme parks and things like that, or whatever it is, right? Or I want to go on a trip to Disney World, or I want to see Hollywood myself, or whatever, these kinds of things. Or you're just addicted to movie after movie. You're just paying, money on top of money on top of money to watch more and more and more and more. Now, when that happens, you think, oh, what's the big deal? I'm just entertaining myself. But actually, you're supporting an entire industry that creates corruption, right? That creates purposelessness and feeds purposelessness to the rest of society. You actually become part of that industry. As a consumer of that industry, and as a heavy consumer of that industry, I would add, that you're actually a supporter of that industry. You become part of that industry. And that creates batil in society, falsehood in society. If our young kids, for example, are spending 16 hours, 8, 10, 16 hours on a video game, immersed completely, they get lost in that world. And the mind is a crazy thing, especially a young mind. When they're immersed in that kind of entertainment all the time, this is the kind of young mind that has no time to think. رَبَّنَا مَا خَلَقْتَ هَذَا بَاطِلًا. my Rabb, you didn't create this without purpose. They don't look at the sky and the tree outside and ponder and reflect. They're no longer capable of that because all of their intellectual capacity is spent on getting 100% synchronization in some game, or earning a trophy, or being ranked #1 online, or whatever it is. That's where all the capacity goes. So there's two implications here. One, don't be corrupt and eat each other's money. And two is don't spend money wastefully. And these two things are actually hand in hand. Because when enough of a society becomes absorbed in wasteful spending, that actually means they're self-absorbed. They're self-absorbed. And when enough of a society is self-absorbed, then corruption can happen all around them and they won't raise a finger. They won't ever raise their voice because they've already been turned into zombies. These two things actually go hand in hand. So you'll find horrible levels of political, economic, and social corruption taking place in our societies. You might even get the news feed, or you might get people saying, sign this petition, or this or that or the other. But then you're like, but I was watching a video with cats playing a piano, so I'm going to go back to that. You can't invest yourself now in standing up for haqq because you're too engrossed in batil, in purposelessness. So, falsehood spreads when purposelessness spreads. These two things are interconnected. Anyway, Allah Azza wa Jal now takes the next level. What's the next level of corruption that takes place in a society? It's such a progressive ayah, subhanallah. لا تأكلوا أموالكم بينكم بالباطل وتدلوا بها إلى الحكام. And in doing so, the second la is not mentioned, so it becomes a kind of bayan. So tudlu, I will explain the Arabic word to you first. Al-idla in Arabic is actually from dalu. Dalu means a bucket. And a bucket is filled with water and it's slowly pulled up. And buckets were also used for, trapping animals. So you put a carrot or something inside a bucket, you've got a rope, and the animal comes close to it, and you slowly pull the bucket, and the animal's kind of really moving from its position. This is the imagery of trapping someone or getting someone to move from their position, drawing them and attracting them. Allah says, don't use these false monies, these wasted monies, and also these monies earned from corrupt means to draw in rulers. تُدْلُ بِهَا إِلَى الْحُكَّامِ. Don't use these monies, by means of them, you draw closer to the rulers. Al-Hukam. Now what is this rulers? It's not just referring to governors and judges, even though that's the case. Don't draw rulers in, meaning don't use money to seduce those who are going to judge over you. Sometimes that judge is not just a Supreme Court judge or a civil court judge or a trial judge or something. Sometimes this is also a family member who's going to make judgment between people. He's a hakim also. Sometimes somebody's going to do an arbitration between two parties. He's a hakim also. And you kind of butter him up from the side a little bit. Or he says, well, I have to make a judgment. Two brothers are having an argument. One of them is a millionaire and the other one works on minimum wage. And you're supposed to make the judgment between them. You're like, I don't think I should go against the millionaire because I was hoping he'd help me out later. If I go against him, then later on he's not going to like me very much. And he's going to actually invite you over for dinner and say, hey, so, what are you thinking? And you're eating at his expensive, dining table. And you're eating the exotic food and thinking, yeah, I probably shouldn't mess with this guy. The other guy, what's he going to do? So when you're in a position of even passing your opinion, sometimes just you giving your opinion, you're in a position of a hakim. But at the highest levels, this can be meant for governments, rulers. That's why even in the United States, you have laws about lobbyists, right? And how there's only so much they can do, and how many politicians get in trouble for it. Gifts they receive. This is literally the expression in the Quran, تُدْلُوا بِهَا إِلَى الْحُكَّامِ. You just draw in rulers towards yourselves. Reel them in towards yourselves using money. The ultimate form of corruption. لِتَأْكُلُوا فَرِيقًا مِنْ أَمْوَالِ النَّاسِ. Oh, strange language in the Quran, beautifully strange. He says, so you can consume a broken off faction, a broken off piece from the monies of people. Allah could have said, حَظًّا مِنْ أَمْوَالِ النَّاسِ نَصِيبًا مِنْ أَمْوَالِ النَّاسِ. جُزْءًا مِنْ أَمْوَالِ النَّاسِ. A portion has many words in Arabic. Allah chose the word fariq. لِتَأْكُلُوا فَرِيقًا مِنْ أَمْوَالِ النَّاسِ. The word fariq suggests something that is, separated completely. In other words, using policy, using government, using judgment, using the law, you manipulate those who can't help themselves and you completely cut them off from the money that they were entitled to, so that they can't ever touch it again. It's actually فَرَقْتَ بَيْنَهُمْ وَبَيْنَ أَمْوَالِهِمْ وَلِتَأْكُلُوا فَرِيقًا مِنْ أَمْوَالِ النَّاسِ. And this is the monies of the people, suggesting that the corruption isn't just about two people having an argument. Eventually this thing grows enough that you have corrupt businesses that can then seduce governments, and then by seducing the governments, they can get discounts, subsidiaries, they can get tax advantages and things. Those tax advantages, those savings that these billion-dollar corporations get, who are they taking the money from? They're taking the money from the people. They're actually bleeding the people. That's what they're doing. And nobody sees it. It's all done behind closed doors. But it's actually people that are being bled dry. Their tax monies are being taken. And so this, what seems like a very basic statement from thousands of years ago in the Quran, is still extremely applicable. لِتَأْكُلُوا فَرِيقًا مِنْ أَمْوَالِ النَّاسِ بِالْإِثْمِ Using in sinful ways. Ithm actually from atham means a penalty, meaning they're doing so in a way that will cost them a great penalty. And this is worthy of a terrible penalty. بِالْإِثْمِ وَأَنْتُمْ تَعْلَمُونَ And you very well know. You're very well aware of what you're doing. In this one brief ayah, Allah Azza wa Jal has actually given us a very powerful set of instructions. And so I want to, on the one hand, not just bash corrupt businesses and governments that are in the billions. I want to start with ourselves. Ourselves, we have issues. Number one, we have to change the way we do business with each other. We have to change the way we conduct our money matters. With those of you that have jobs, that are being paid to provide a particular service, be honest at your job. Provide the service you promise that you'll provide. Those of you that are in businesses like the construction business, or you run a car mechanic thing, or whatever else, you constantly have an opportunity to shortchange your customer, to tell them they need a new transmission when all they needed was an oil change. To tell them that their entire, the house's foundation is gone, you need a new foundation, while all they needed was a new plank of wood on the side. You can do that, because they'll believe you. They'll believe you. You're constantly in a position to eat people's money using falsehood. That's the first thing that we have to now become aware of. Because if you haven't learned that, then there was no point to this Ramadan. There was no point in praying and fasting and making dua to Allah, and nothing about the way your greed hasn't been taken away. You can control your hunger, you can control your thirst, but you couldn't control your hunger for money. And then what's the point then? That's the graduation into the next phase. That's what we're supposed to learn to do. So that's the first bit of advice that comes out of these ayat. The second bit of advice, the underscore of these ayat, and particularly this phrase, وَلَا تَأْكُلُوا أَمْوَالَكُمْ بَيْنَكُمْ بِالْبَاطِلِ, is actually to be mindful of the fact that when we spend money, there are people in our own families, there are people in our circles, there are people in our communities that are worthy of assistance. They need help. I'm not saying you shouldn't buy new clothes for yourselves. I'm not saying you should never entertain yourself. That's not what I'm saying. But I am saying be mindful of the fact that there are people in need around you. And very close to you. You don't have to look very far to find people in need. And when you spend money on things that don't really have a purpose, then actually think about the fact that according to Allah, that was their money. One of the most powerful expressions I've ever read, it just changed my thinking about how the Quran talks about spending on people in need, is وَلَا يَحُضُّ عَلَى طَعَامِ الْمِسْكِينِ. وَلَا يَحُضُّ عَلَى طَعَامِ الْمِسْكِينِ. It's incredible because Allah Azza wa Jalla didn't say وَلَا يَحُضُّ عَلَى إِطْعَامِ الْمِسْكِينِ. إِطْعَامِ الْمِسْكِينِ, you would translate, He doesn't encourage feeding the poor. He doesn't encourage feeding the poor. But Allah said وَلَا يَحُضُّ عَلَى طَعَامِ الْمِسْكِينِ. Ta'am means the food, not feeding. In other words, if you say, I don't encourage feeding, you're going out of your way to feed somebody else. But if you say He doesn't encourage to give the food of the poor, when you say food of the poor, it actually is their food. It's theirs, it's not yours. You're not feeding them, you're giving them what is actually already theirs. This is haqqun ma'loom, what the Quran calls. A known right, a declared right that they already have. So being mindful of that within our own families especially, whether your family is here or they're abroad, whether you have people in your circle, and it's just not limited to family, even friends. Some of your friends have lost a job, they're in trouble, they're having a hard time paying the rent, they're not saying anything to you. You ask every once in a while, hey, how's the job hunt going? They say, yeah, still looking. Well, they're not going to say, I can't pay the rent. They're not going to come to you and say that. You should have the sensitivity to just write a check, sign it, and leave it under the plate when you go for iftar or something, and just don't bring it up again. Just do it for them. That kind of thing. So to develop that sensitivity to the people around us, that will remove from us the the falsehood in spending, the wastefulness in spending, and consuming our money among each other. And by the way, bainakum, the last implication of it that I'd like to share with you, by use of the phrase bainakum, a powerful implication that comes from it is that we encourage each other on the wrong thing too. We create a culture in which one group of people spends wastefully, and then the other says, hey, they did it, we got to do it too now. They got that, we should get it too. They got a new car, when are we going to get a new car? You know? And then with corruption also. If they do corruption, why can't we do corruption? Everybody does it. And people develop this mentality that they lean on each other and say, it's okay for me to do the wrong thing because there are plenty of other people doing it too. It's not like I'm the root of the problem. There's plenty of other people already doing it. I'm just one drop in a moving river. Right? So you can't hold me responsible. This is exactly what Allah is pointing to. You don't create this culture among yourselves. And if you're the only one that's going to stand straight, so be it. You be the only one. You be the odd one out. But be that. And that's the lesson of Ramadan that we should come out with. May Allah Azza wa Jal accept our fasting and make us of those who make the most of this month, whatever is left of this month. May Allah Azza wa Jal overlook our shortcomings.